A guttural, commanding voice sliced through the strained quiet of the first-class cabin. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to get the hell off my plane. Now." Elias Vance looked up from his secured laptop, the words taking a moment to register. His gaze met the furious eyes of Captain Richard Decker, a man whose crisp white uniform seemed at odds with the raw contempt etched on his face. Decker wasn't speaking to him privately. He was projecting, his finger pointed directly at Elias's chest for the entire cabin to see. A collective gasp was followed by the insidious rustle of passengers whispering, their phones slowly rising like weapons to capture the unfolding drama. 2 airport security officers appeared in the jetway, their faces grim and unreadable. The senior officer stepped onto the aircraft, his eyes locked on Elias. But instead of handcuffs, he was holding up something that made the captain's jaw go slack. Elias Vance's own goddamn FBI credentials. Before we expose the shocking, hidden truth behind this captain's insane decision, where in the world are you tuning in from today? Smash that like button if you've ever felt judged by your appearance, and subscribe right now, because you are not going to want to miss how this agent gets his ultimate, world-changing revenge. Now, let's peel back the layers of a story that proves one man's prejudice can become a threat to an entire nation. The phone's vibration on his nightstand felt like an electric shock at precisely 2:14 a.m., dragging Elias from the shallow depths of a dreamless sleep. It was a phantom limb. That call, a feeling so familiar he knew its purpose before his eyes even focused. Only the Bureau called at this hour, only when the world was tilting off its axis. "Vance," he answered, his voice a low gravel, the sound of a man permanently on standby. "Elias, it's Director Reed." Evelyn Reed's voice was stripped of all pleasantries, a steel wire of pure urgency. "We have a critical situation developing in D.C. the Damascus Syndicate. Credible intel says they're moving up their timeline on a multi-target attack." Elias was already swinging his legs over the side of the bed, the cold floorboards a jolt to his system. "Details? Encrypted line only. The full brief is in your inbox, but I can tell you it's a direct offshoot of the network you dismantled in Brussels. They're planning something big, and they're planning it soon. I need you on the first flight out of Chicago." The last vestiges of sleep evaporated. The Damascus Syndicate. He'd spent 2 years mapping their shadow organization, learning their signatures, their philosophies, the very scent of their operations. If they were active on U.S. soil, it was a 5-alarm fire. "I'll be on the 6:05 to Dulles," he stated, not asked. "Good. Assistant Director Barnes will meet you on the ground. And Elias?" A slight pause. "Maintain full cover. No one needs to know you're anything other than a consultant on a business trip." The line clicked dead. Elias stood in the blue-tinged darkness of his apartment, the mission descending upon him like a shroud. He became someone else. Not the man who enjoyed a rare whiskey on a Friday night, but Special Agent Vance, an instrument of federal will. At 38, Elias Vance had dedicated 15 years of his life to the FBI, becoming one of its sharpest assets in the counterterrorism division after a decorated run in Army intelligence. He was a ghost, a specialist in unraveling intricate terror plots before they could blossom into headlines and body counts. He had averted 4 major attacks, a fact known only to a handful of people in sealed rooms, his name a ghost in the machine of national security. The red glow of the alarm clock read 2:19 a.m. He had less than 4 hours. He moved with the fluid, economical grace of a man who has packed a go-bag 1,000 times. A quick, cold shower to shock his system into full alert. He packed the bare essentials, adding his encrypted laptop, a satellite phone, and his secondary weapon, holstered at the small of his back, all standard operating procedure for an agent traveling hot. His high-rise apartment overlooking the Chicago River was stark and impersonal, a transient space that bore the scars of a life lived out of a suitcase. The only personal touch was a single, slightly faded photo on his bookshelf. His younger sister, an ER doctor in Seattle, smiling at her wedding. It was a reminder of the world he was fighting to protect, a world he himself could never fully inhabit. Meaningful relationships were a luxury this line of work rarely afforded. At 4:30 a.m., Elias summoned a car. The driver, a young man blasting electronic music at a low volume, glanced at Elias's suit and briefcase with mild curiosity. Elias offered a non-committal nod, his mind already thousands of miles away, wargaming scenarios in the nation's capital. The less he was remembered, the better he was at his job. O'Hare International Airport was a throbbing hive of activity, even at 5:10 a.m. Elias bypassed the bustling check-in counters and made a direct line for the priority desk, his federal credentials tucked neatly inside his suit jacket, ready for presentation. The woman at the counter, her name tag reading Brenda, gave his government rate ticket and ID a perfunctory glance. "Aisle or window, Mr. Vance?" Her tone was flat, automated. "Window, thank you. And this case will need to be checked." He placed his hardened, secure briefcase onto the scale. It was standard procedure for carrying sensitive government equipment. Brenda's fingers typed with a deliberate slowness, her eyes flicking up to his face, then back to her screen, then back to his face. "I'm going to need to see another form of identification, please." The request was unusual. Federal ID was typically sufficient for domestic travel, especially on a government fare. But Elias produced his Illinois driver's license without protest. Arguing would only cause a delay. "And what's the purpose of your trip to D.C. today, sir?" she asked, her gaze holding his a second too long. The question was entirely out of protocol. "Government business," Elias answered, his voice betraying no emotion. She finally printed his boarding pass, handing it to him with a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "TSA pre-check is to your left. Have a safe flight." Elias navigated to the expedited security line, a small perk of his status. Yet even here, a random flag was triggered. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here for additional screening," a TSA agent said, gesturing toward a secondary pat-down area. Elias complied, stepping onto the mat and raising his arms. He had learned years ago that the algorithm for random seemed to disproportionately select faces like his. The agent's search was thorough, his gloved hands lingering on the slight bulge in Elias's jacket. "What's this?" the agent asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Federal credentials," Elias replied, keeping his voice low, pulling back his jacket just enough for the agent to see the leather holder without displaying its contents to the river of passengers flowing by. The agent's demeanor shifted instantly, a subtle flicker of recognition and deference in his eyes. "Okay, sir, you're all set. Have a good morning." Elias arrived at the gate with a precious 25 minutes to spare. The boarding call for first class had just begun. He approached the gate agent, who took his boarding pass and ID, then did a visible double-take, her eyebrows arching high. "Is there an issue?" Elias asked calmly. "No, sir, no," she stammered, recovering quickly. "Just confirming your seat." "Yes, here you go. Enjoy your flight." Stepping onto the aircraft, a flight attendant named Amber greeted him, checking his boarding pass yet again. "Good morning, sir. 2A, right this way." Her smile felt brittle, rehearsed, as he stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin. She approached him again. "Sir, I'm sorry. Could I just verify your pass one last time?" This was the third check. It was no longer random. It was a pattern. Elias handed it over, his patience a finite resource being steadily depleted. She studied it as if looking for a flaw in a diamond before returning it with a tight, "Thank you, sir. Pre-departure beverage?" "Just water," he said, sinking into the plush leather seat. As he settled in, he felt the stares. He was the only black man in the first-class cabin, a familiar reality that still managed to draw quiet attention in 2025. He met a few glances with a neutral expression until their owners looked away, suddenly fascinated by the safety card in their seat-back pocket. The cabin was nearly full, but the aircraft door remained stubbornly open, a breach of schedule that sent a prickle of unease up Elias's spine. They should have been pushing back 10 minutes ago. He discreetly opened his laptop, its military-grade privacy screen making it appear blank to anyone at his side, and began a final review of the briefing on the DC threat. Every minute was critical. Then, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Richard Decker stepped out. He scanned the first-class cabin, his steely blue eyes passing over passengers until they landed on Elias. Decker's gaze lingered, narrowed, and then he retreated back into the cockpit without a word, a stark departure from the typical folksy greeting many pilots offered. Another 10 minutes bled away. Elias sent a quick, encrypted text to Director Reed. "Possible ground delay. Will update ETA." Her reply was instantaneous. "Unacceptable. We have active intel the window is closing. Get here." Elias glanced out the window at the morning sun, painting the tarmac gold. A major American city was under threat. The people who were planning to harm it were moving, and he was stuck on a stationary plane, the subject of a captain's unnerving stare, with a terrifying premonition that his journey to save lives was about to be deliberately and personally sabotaged. A full 25 minutes after their scheduled departure, Flight 818 remained inert at the gate. A low murmur of discontent rippled through the cabin as passengers audibly rescheduled morning meetings and vented their frustration. Elias, outwardly serene, continued to work, but every one of his senses was on high alert, cataloging the growing tension around him. The cockpit door swung open again. This time, Captain Decker emerged with purpose, flanked by the lead flight attendant and the gate agent who had boarded moments earlier. His eyes, cold as chips of ice, swept the cabin and locked onto Elias with unnerving precision. He strode down the aisle, stopping directly beside seat 2A. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please," Decker announced, his voice booming with authority, silencing the cabin instantly. "I apologize for this delay. We're dealing with a security concern that must be resolved before we can safely depart." The captain's gaze never left Elias. "Sir, I need to have a word with you." Elias carefully closed his laptop. "What's the problem, Captain?" He was acutely aware of the smartphones now aimed in his direction, their small red lights indicating they were recording. A public drama was unfolding, and he had been cast in the leading role. "We've had several reports of concern regarding your presence on this flight," Decker declared, his voice loud enough to carry to the rows behind them. "For the security and comfort of everyone on board, I am going to have to ask you to collect your personal items and deplane." The sheer audacity of the accusation was stunning, yet Elias's training kicked in, a firewall of professional calm descending over his fury. "May I ask for the specific nature of these concerns?" Decker glanced theatrically around the cabin. "A number of your fellow passengers have expressed their discomfort. As captain of this aircraft, their safety is my paramount responsibility. I can't risk it." "I see," Elias said, his voice level and steady. "And what behavior have I exhibited that has caused this widespread discomfort?" He knew the answer. No one had spoken to the crew. He had been working silently since he sat down. The discomfort was originating from one place: the cockpit. "Sir, the exact nature of the security threat is not up for debate," Decker said, his posture rigid. I am giving you a simple, direct order. Cooperate for the safety of this flight. The accusation was as ludicrous as it was insulting. Captain, I am an American citizen traveling to our nation's capital on urgent government business, Elias stated clearly. I have passed every security check. There is no legitimate reason for this. I will require additional identification beyond what you have already provided, Decker demanded, crossing his arms. Elias could feel the weight of dozens of stares, the humiliation of physical pressure. He had faced down armed terrorists in foreign cities, yet here, in the first-class cabin of a domestic flight, he was being treated like a public menace. I have already shown my federal and state identification multiple times, Captain. However, if it will expedite our departure, I can inform you that I am a federal agent on official assignment. A smirk flickered across Decker's face. Anybody can say that, pal. I need to see proof. Credentials. Elias reached into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements, conscious that any sudden motion could be misinterpreted by the nervous audience. He angled his body to shield the contents from the recording phones and presented his FBI credentials, the gold badge and photo ID clearly visible to the captain. Decker gave the credentials a cursory, dismissive glance. I'm sorry. That's not good enough. These could be fakes for all I know. I'll need to have airport security verify their authenticity. The thin wire of Elias's patience was beginning to fray. Captain, with all due respect, every second we remain on the ground puts American lives at risk. My assignment is time-critical. The only risk I see right now is the one you're posing to my passengers by refusing to comply. Decker shot back, his voice rising. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, a mixture of fear and excitement. If you refuse to deplane voluntarily, my only alternative is to deplane every single passenger and have you forcibly removed. Elias made a calculated decision. A protracted standoff would serve only the interests of the enemy he was trying to stop. He needed off the plane, but on his own terms, to regain control. He reached for his phone. Fine, I will deplane, he said. But first I'm contacting my supervisor and the FBI's airport liaison. You can make all the calls you want from the terminal, Decker snapped. Now get your things. As Elias stood and opened the overhead bin, the man in row 4 leaned over to his wife and whispered, loud enough for Elias to hear, "Thank God." I knew there was something off about him. The words were a casual, brutal confirmation of everything Elias already knew. He pretended not to hear, his face a mask of indifference as he retrieved his laptop and briefcase. The walk down the aisle was the longest of his life. Every pair of eyes followed him, some filled with pity, most with suspicion and relief. At the aircraft door, Flight Attendant Amber studiously avoided his gaze, murmuring a robotic, "Thank you for your cooperation." Elias stepped into the cold, sterile jetway. As the cabin door thudded shut behind him, he heard Captain Decker's triumphant announcement to the remaining passengers. "Folks, we apologize again for the disturbance. Our security concern has been handled, and we should be on our way shortly." Alone in the jetway, Elias took a single, deep breath, purging the hot anger and replacing it with cold resolve. He had endured prejudice his entire life, but this was the first time it had directly interfered with a mission of national security. The personal insult was irrelevant. The mission was all that mattered. He dialed the number for the Bureau's airport liaison, his voice low and precise. "This is Special Agent Vance. I require immediate assistance at Gate C-12, O'Hare. I've been removed from Pinnacle Flight 818 to Dulles by the captain, despite presenting credentials. I am on a Priority 1 assignment, designation Phoenix 7. The code was a high-level alert, a trigger that would set a cascade of events into motion. Wheels would begin to turn, and Elias prayed they would turn fast enough. In the bustling terminal, Elias was escorted to a Pinnacle Airlines customer service desk. Behind the counter sat a woman named Heather Williams, whose smile was as polished and artificial as the marble floor. Her name tag, pinned to a perfectly pressed navy blazer, announced 15 years of service. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you today?" Her Midwestern accent was friendly but firm. "I was just ordered off Flight 818 to Dulles by Captain Decker," Elias explained, keeping his tone professional. "I'm on urgent government business and need to be rebooked on the next available flight immediately." Heather's fingers tapped rhythmically on her keyboard. "I'm seeing here that you were deplaned due to a security issue," she said, her smile faltering slightly, as if he were a misbehaving child. "Unfortunately, sir, once a captain makes a security-based decision, our policy is to fully support their authority." "There was no security issue," Elias stated, his voice like flint. "The captain acted on a baseless assumption and refused to accept my federal credentials." Heather's professional veneer became a hard shell. "Sir, with all due respect, our captains are consummate professionals with thousands of hours of training. They do not make these decisions lightly. I need to speak to your direct supervisor." "Now," Elias said, his patience exhausted. "And I need a direct line to airport security." "I can certainly page a supervisor for you, but there may be a wait," Heather replied smoothly. "And as for airport security, they are the ones who enforce a captain's request in these matters." Elias pulled out his phone. "I've already contacted my agency's liaison. He will be here any moment." Right on cue, a man in a crisp airport security uniform, with "Chief" embroidered on his collar, approached the desk. His name badge identified him as Miguel Martinez. "Mr. Vance?" Martinez asked, his expression unreadable. "Special Agent Vance," Elias corrected, smoothly producing his credentials. Martinez took them, his examination far more thorough than the captain's had been. "I got a priority alert about an incident on Flight 818. Tell me exactly what happened." Just as Elias began his account, his phone buzzed. The screen read, A.D. Barnes, Assistant Director David Barnes, his immediate superior. "Excuse me, Chief. I have to take this. It's my commanding officer," Elias said. Martinez nodded. Elias stepped a few feet away. "Vance?" "Elias! What the hell is going on? I just got a Priority 1 operational interference flag from the airport liaison. Are you being held?" Barnes's voice was a controlled explosion. "Negative, sir. The captain refused to let me fly. Claimed I was a security risk and wouldn't acknowledge my credentials. I'm with the chief of airport security now, trying to resolve." "Put him on the phone," Barnes commanded. Elias walked back to the desk and handed his phone to a surprised Martinez. "My assistant director wishes to speak with you." Martinez took the phone, his brow furrowed. "This is Chief Martinez." He listened, his face slowly transforming from professional skepticism to visible alarm. "Yes, sir. I understand completely. Yes, that is deeply disturbing. We will rectify this immediately, sir." He handed the phone back to Elias. His entire posture changed. He was no longer dealing with a difficult passenger. He was dealing with a federal incident. "Agent Vance, my sincere apologies for this entire situation," Martinez said, his tone now one of utmost seriousness. "I can assure you we are taking this matter with extreme prejudice." Elias put his phone back to his ear. "Sir?" "I have explained the nature of your assignment in no uncertain terms," Barnes said. "They understand the clock is ticking. You call me the second you are airborne." "Yes, sir." Elias ended the call and faced Martinez again. "Agent Vance, you said Captain Decker claimed you were a threat, but refused to validate your credentials?" Martinez asked, now in full investigative mode. "That's right. He glanced at them for less than a second and called them fake." Martinez's jaw clenched. "And did any other passengers or crew mention a specific reason for this concern before he approached you?" Elias held his gaze. Chief Martinez, let's be direct. I was the only black man in a first-class cabin full of white passengers. I was sitting quietly at my seat, working on my computer. The captain's concern began the moment he laid eyes on me. Martinez gave a slow, deliberate nod. The unspoken was now spoken. He turned to a now pale Heather Williams. Ms. Williams, I need full access to your system. I want to pull Captain Decker's complete flight and incident history for the last 5 years. Chief, I'm not authorized, she started to say. This is now a federal security investigation, Ms. Williams. Martinez cut her off, his voice edged with steel. Your authorization is no longer required. Mine is. As Martinez began digging into the airline's records at Heather's terminal, another man arrived, moving with an air of authority that parted the crowds. He was black, in his early 50s, and wore a suit that was clearly off the rack but impeccably maintained. Agent Vance, I'm James Peterson, head of the FBI Airport Liaison Unit here at O'Hare, he said, extending a hand. It's a disgrace we're meeting under these circumstances. Peterson, Elias said, shaking his hand. Good to see you. They had met at a joint task force briefing the year prior. You know each other? Martinez asked, looking up from the screen. Agent Vance's analysis of the Brussels network was required reading for my entire unit, Peterson explained. The man is a legend in the counter-terror community. Martinez's expression grew even more grim. I'm not surprised. I've just found 4 other incidents in the last 2 years where Captain Decker has cited vague security concerns to have passengers removed. All of them were men of color. That's a pattern of racial profiling, Peterson stated, his face hardening. We need to elevate this, now. He made a call, his voice low but filled with command. When he hung up, he looked at Elias. The Senior Vice President of Midwest Operations for Pinnacle is on his way down here. Name's Robert Davies. He should be here in under 5 minutes. Heather, who had been listening with a look of dawning horror, finally spoke. Chief, should I try to get Agent Vance on the next flight to D.C.? No, Peterson said flatly. Agent Vance is getting on Flight 818. This plane isn't going anywhere until he is back in his assigned seat, and Captain Decker is going to have some questions to answer. Elias checked his watch. The operational delay was now over an hour. Every lost second was a win for the terrorists in Washington. But he understood Peterson's point. This wasn't just about his mission anymore. It was about ensuring this couldn't happen to anyone else, especially not when national security was on the line. I appreciate the support, Elias said, but the mission comes first. Getting to D.C. is the only priority. The fastest way to D.C. now is on that airplane, Peterson countered. Even if we chartered a bureau jet, by the time we got clearance and a flight plan, you'd be landing later. The most effective solution is to put you back on that plane. A flushed, frantic-looking man in a $1,000 suit sprinted towards their small group. I'm Robert Davies, Senior VP, he panted, loosening his tie. What in God's name is happening with my flight crew? Martinez and Peterson gave him a rapid, brutal briefing. Davies' face drained of all color as he listened to the details. A decorated FBI agent, a time-sensitive national security mission, a captain with a documented history of racial profiling. This is a catastrophe, Davies whispered when they finished. An absolute, unmitigated catastrophe. Agent Vance, on behalf of Pinnacle Airlines, I am profoundly sorry. We will deal with Captain Decker with the utmost severity. I appreciate that, Mr. Davies, Elias replied, his focus unwavering. But what I need right now is for that plane to take off with me on it. Absolutely, Davies agreed, already barking orders into his phone as they strode quickly toward Gate C-12. A small, powerful retinue had formed around Elias, Davies, the airline executive, Martinez, the airport security chief, and Peterson, the FBI liaison. They moved as a single unit, a task force assembled to undo the damage caused by one man's prejudice. Elias braced himself. Walking back onto that plane would be one of the most difficult things he'd ever done. But he'd walked into far more dangerous situations with less support. And right now, the most dangerous situation wasn't on the plane. It was waiting for him in Washington, D.C. As they reached the jetway, the door to the aircraft swung open, and Elias prepared to face the man who had dared to declare him a threat. The procession moved down the jetway, their determined footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Through the small window of the aircraft door, Elias could see the anxious faces of passengers who had been stranded on the tarmac for nearly 2 hours. Flight attendant Amber was standing guard at the entrance. Her jaw dropped when she saw Elias returning with a phalanx of grim-faced officials. "I need to speak with Captain Decker. Immediately," Robert Davies commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Amber nervously keyed the interphone. "Captain, there are several officials here to see you. And, sir, they're with the passenger who was deplaned." A moment later, Richard Decker appeared, his look of smug authority dissolving into confusion and alarm as he registered the high-level delegation at his door. His eyes scanned from Davies to Martinez to Peterson, finally landing on Elias with a look of sheer disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he blustered, trying to salvage his command. "Captain Decker, I'm Robert Davies, your Senior Vice President of Operations," Davies said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have created a catastrophic situation. You removed a decorated FBI special agent, traveling on a time-critical national security mission, from this aircraft without a shred of justifiable cause." Decker's face flushed a deep crimson. "I acted on security concerns expressed by my passengers." "That is a lie," Chief Martinez interjected, stepping forward. "We've already reviewed the preliminary cabin and gate footage. Not a single passenger approached you or any member of your crew to express concern about Agent Vance prior to you accosting him." Decker's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. The knowledge that he was on camera, that his fabrication could be so easily proven false, had clearly not occurred to him. "Furthermore, Captain," James Peterson added, his voice like ice, "we have discovered a disturbing pattern. 4 prior incidents where you have removed minority passengers under the guise of security concerns, all of which were later found to be completely baseless." The confrontation was now a public spectacle. Passengers in the first few rows were openly filming the scene. Elias stood back slightly, a silent, imposing witness to the deconstruction of Decker's authority. The vindication was cold comfort. The mission clock was still ticking. "Captain Decker," Davies continued, "Agent Vance is reboarding this aircraft and taking his assigned seat. This flight will depart immediately. Your egregious lack of professional judgment will be handled through official channels when you land in Washington." Decker, his face now a sickly white, sputtered, "I was following protocol for perceived threats." "What specific threat did Agent Vance pose?" Martinez challenged, his voice echoing in the jetway. "Describe the specific behaviors he exhibited that warranted removal from a commercial airliner." Decker couldn't form a coherent sentence. He was being secretive. His focus on his computer was intense. He avoided eye contact with the crew. "He was reviewing classified documents pertaining to an active national security threat," Peterson said, his disgust palpable. "And my investigation shows your crew harassed him for his credentials no fewer than 3 times before you even got involved." Davies turned to Elias. "Agent Vance, on behalf of our entire airline, please accept our deepest apologies. Please, resume your seat." But as Elias moved forward, Decker physically blocked his path. "I cannot, in good conscience, command this aircraft with him on board. I am exercising my ultimate authority as captain." "Your authority does not grant you the right to engage in racial profiling and endanger a federal operation, Captain Decker," Davies snapped. "Now stand aside." For a heart-stopping few seconds, Decker held his ground, a man whose worldview was collapsing in real time. Finally, With a look of pure venom directed at Elias, he stepped aside. As Elias walked the gauntlet of the first-class aisle, an absolute silence descended on the cabin. Passengers who had previously glared with suspicion now looked away in shame or stared with wide-eyed shock. Elias kept his chin up, his gaze fixed forward, a man reclaiming his space. Once Elias was seated, Davies addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we offer our sincere apologies for this unacceptable delay. We have resolved the misunderstanding, and we will be departing for Washington momentarily." Decker was now engaged in a furious, whispered argument with Davies and Martinez at the front of the cabin. Elias couldn't make out the words, but Decker's rigid posture and violent gestures spoke volumes. The captain was refusing to fly. A few tense minutes later, Davies returned to Elias's seat, his face grim. "Agent Vance, I am beyond sorry, but we have one more brief delay. Captain Decker has suddenly called in sick. We are bringing in a replacement captain who is already here in the terminal." Elias just nodded. It was expected. "Thank you for handling it, Mr. Davies." Davies lowered his voice. "This is the most unprofessional and frankly bigoted act I have ever witnessed in my career. We will be taking decisive action, I assure you." "My only concern is getting to Washington," Elias repeated. "The replacement is on her way now. We should be airborne in 20 minutes, tops." Davies once again addressed the now mutinous-sounding passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unforeseen crew change, we anticipate one final delay of approximately 20 minutes. We are truly sorry for this extended inconvenience and will get you on your way as soon as possible." A collective, agonized groan swept the plane. Elias checked his secure phone. A new message from Director Reed burned on the screen. "Syndicate is mobilizing. Intel suggests accelerated timeline." "What is your goddamn ETA?" Elias quickly replied with the new arrival estimate, adding a terse, "crew issues resolved," making up time in the air. 15 minutes later, a new pilot strode confidently down the jetway. Captain Eva Rostova was a woman in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. She nodded professionally to the crew as she headed for the cockpit. As she passed Elias's seat, she paused for a fraction of a second. "Agent Vance," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "We met at the DHS FBI Aviation Security Summit last spring. Don't worry, we'll get you to Dulles. Wheels up to wheels down, faster than the law allows." Elias felt a flicker of surprise and gratitude. He simply nodded. "Thank you, Captain." Within minutes, the cabin door was sealed, the engines spooled to life, and the plane finally began to push back from the gate. Can you believe the sheer, unmitigated audacity? Comment "disgrace" down below if you think Captain Decker deserves more than just losing his job. Hit that like button to show your support for Elias's incredible composure in the face of this insanity. And make sure you're subscribed, because the story is about to take a terrifying turn you will not see coming. What do you think is really waiting for Elias in D.C.? Will the consequences of this delay be more severe than anyone can imagine? As the aircraft climbed steeply into the Midwestern sky, a palpable tension remained in the cabin, a toxic residue from the morning's drama. Elias forced his attention back to his secured laptop, immersing himself in threat assessments and suspect profiles, but he could still feel the weight of passengers' glances. Some were furtive and apologetic, others resentful, as if he were the source of their inconvenience. The man across the aisle in seat 2B, who had been hiding behind a copy of the Wall Street Journal, finally cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low murmur. Elias looked up. The man was in his late 50s, dressed in a sharply tailored suit, a gleaming gold watch on his wrist. A name tag from a corporate leadership conference identified him as Mark Scanlon, Senior Vice President. I feel compelled to say something, Scanlon began, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. I was one of the people who mentioned to the flight attendant that I felt uneasy. Elias partially closed his laptop, giving the man his full, undivided attention. He said nothing. And I want to apologize, Scanlon continued, his face reddening. I saw how intensely you were focused on your computer, your posture. It all seemed off. It was a mistake, a terrible one. What exactly was off about it, Mr. Scanlon? Elias asked, his voice devoid of accusation, a simple request for facts. Scanlon shifted in his seat. Look, in this day and age, with everything that happens, you can't be too vigilant. I travel for a living. I'm always looking for behavior that seems out of the ordinary. And what was extraordinary about a man working on his laptop before a flight? Nothing specific, I guess, Scanlon admitted, looking deeply ashamed. It was just a feeling, a gut reaction, and when the captain singled you out, I just assumed my gut was right. Your gut was wrong, Elias stated flatly. I know that now, and I am so sorry. It was a prejudice I didn't even know I had, Scanlon confessed. Elias had heard this 1,000 times, the denial of prejudice in the same breath as its admission. Mr. Scanlon, for the last 15 years, I have dedicated my life to protecting this country from men who want to kill us because of our way of life. The single greatest obstacle I face in doing that job isn't the enemy. It's the snap judgments and gut feelings of the very people I am trying to keep safe. Scanlon stared at him, utterly speechless. He gave a small, defeated nod and turned back to his newspaper, though Elias doubted he could read a single word. Flight attendant Amber approached with the beverage service, her earlier animosity replaced by a fawning, anxious-to-please demeanor. Agent Vance, so sorry for the delay again. Can I get you anything at all? Coffee? Juice? A soda? Coffee, black, thank you, Elias replied, his tone professional and clipped. Of course, right away. And some cookies? We have Biscoff cookies. Just the coffee is fine. As Amber nervously poured his coffee, the woman in the seat next to him, who had been immersed in a thick legal textbook, spoke quietly. They're certainly trying to make amends now, aren't they? Elias allowed himself a brief, wry smile. It would seem so. Laura Jensen, she said, extending a hand. I'm a federal judge for the Eastern District of Virginia. I couldn't help but notice your credentials during the commotion. I've presided over several cases brought by the Bureau. Elias Vance, he replied, shaking her hand. Counterterrorism. I had a feeling it was something critical, she said. The way you handled that, Captain. I've seen seasoned litigators with less composure under pressure. It was an absolute disgrace. Unfortunately, Judge, it wasn't an entirely new experience, Elias admitted. I can imagine, though perhaps not so dramatic, she said with empathy. The assumptions people make about a woman on the federal bench are tiring. It was a gesture of solidarity that Elias appreciated. Just then, his secure phone vibrated with a high-priority encrypted alert. He excused himself and checked the screen. The message from Director Reed was a punch to the gut. Targets confirmed. Timeline moved. Hostile action. Expected within 4 hours of your arrival. Full team brief at secure site. Barnes will meet you on tarmac. 4 hours. The delay in Chicago had consumed half of his operational window. The margin for error was now 0. He sent back a single-character acknowledgement and returned to his work with a furious, laser-like focus. The incident with Decker wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a potential death sentence for innocent people. He forced his mind away from the simmering rage and back into the cold, analytical space of his training. He replayed similar incidents in his memory. The local cops in Miami who'd held him at gunpoint during a surveillance operation because a neighbor reported a suspicious black man in a car, costing him a key intercept. The hotel security guard in Dallas, who had refused him entry to a conference room where he was scheduled to brief the Secret Service. Each incident was a small cut, a paper-thin slice of humiliation that he had professionally absorbed, reported, and moved past. But the scars remained, a constant reminder that the uniform and the badge did not make him immune to the disease he was fighting to protect the country from. The aircraft's intercom crackled to life. It was Captain Rostova. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. I want to personally apologize again for our very delayed departure out of Chicago. We have favorable tailwinds and are cruising at 38,000 feet. I'm happy to report we will be making up a significant amount of time. Our new estimated arrival at Dulles International is 10:19 a.m., just under 30 minutes behind our original schedule." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held a new, steely resonance. "I also feel it's necessary to address the event that took place prior to our departure. While specific details are a matter for official investigation, I want to be unequivocal. Pinnacle Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The safety and security of our passengers and crew is our highest priority, and that includes creating an environment of mutual respect. Customer relations staff will be available at our arrival gate in Washington for any passengers who wish to share their experience." The cabin was silent after her words. Elias saw Mark Scanlon stare at the floor. Judge Jensen gave him a subtle, approving nod. Captain Rostova had just done more than fly a plane. She had taken a stand. As the plane continued its journey east, Elias finalized his preliminary analysis of the intel. To the other passengers, he was a man staring intently at a screen. In reality, he was deep in a digital war room, hunting for the ghosts who wanted to turn a beautiful day in the nation's capital into a landscape of fire and fear. He remembered Captain Decker's face, contorted with a certainty that he, Elias Vance, was the threat. How easy it was for some people to see danger in the color of a man's skin, while being completely blind to the real evil that walks among us. As the familiar shape of the Washington Monument pierced the morning haze, Elias packed his laptop. He had compartmentalized the morning's fury and humiliation. A city's lifeblood was at stake. That was the only thing that mattered. As Captain Rostova's voice announced their final descent, Elias felt the familiar click in his mind, the transition from traveler to hunter. The battle had already begun, and he was 2 hours behind. The plane touched down at Dulles with a smooth professionalism that was the hallmark of its new captain. As the seatbelt sign pinged off, Elias collected his things, his mind already at the secure site, running through tactical scenarios. A new text was on his phone. "Tarmac meet. Exit 1L, black Chevy Tahoe." Black. Captain Rostova was standing just inside the cockpit door as passengers deplaned. When Elias reached her, she spoke in a low voice. "Agent Vance, you should know, there's a media circus forming at the gate. Someone on the flight must have leaked the video of the incident." Elias's jaw tightened. A public profile was the last thing he needed when walking into a covert operation. "Thank you for the warning, Captain, and for the flight." "Get them, Agent," she said with a nod. "And for the record, I've already filed my official incident report on Captain Decker. It's blistering." Stepping out of the aircraft, Elias immediately saw the chaos in the terminal. A swarm of reporters and cameras was penned up near the gate, their lenses trained on every passenger who emerged. They were looking for him. Any delay could be catastrophic. Before he could strategize an escape, Judge Jensen was at his side. "Looks like you have an unwelcome reception committee," she observed. "I can't afford the attention," Elias said grimly. "Stay close," she instructed. She led him not towards the main terminal exit, but to a side door marked Authorized Personnel Only. She flashed her federal judge credentials at the TSA agent guarding it, who immediately unlocked the door and waved them through. The sound of shouted questions from reporters faded behind them. "This corridor will bypass the main terminal and take you straight to ground transportation," she said. "Good luck with your business in D.C., Agent Vance." "Judge Jensen, I owe you one," Elias said with genuine gratitude. She handed him a card. "If what happened on that plane leads to a civil case, I can recommend some of the best attorneys in the country. Now go." Elias moved quickly down the sterile hallway and emerged into the controlled chaos of the arrivals pickup area. He instantly saw the black Tahoe, its government plates a beacon in the sea of civilian vehicles. The rear door swung open as he approached. Assistant Director David Barnes, a career FBI man whose face was a roadmap of sleepless nights and high-stakes decisions, moved over to make room. "Vance," Barnes greeted him, his tone tense. "You look like you've been through a war already, and the day has just started." "Sir," Elias said as the Tahoe sped away from the curb, "my apologies for the operational delay." "Don't you dare apologize," Barnes said fiercely. "Director Reed has been on the phone with the Secretary of Transportation and the CEO of Pinnacle. The captain's name is Decker. He's been grounded, and his career is over." "My focus is the operation, sir." "The operation is why this is so damn infuriating," Barnes countered, his voice rising. "We didn't just lose time, Elias. We lost our tactical advantage. Decker's prejudice put this entire mission in jeopardy." He handed Elias a tablet. "New intel. The syndicate is further along than we thought. They have 3 primary targets, all major public gathering spots downtown. The lead operative, a ghost named Zafir al-Haddad, is in charge. Your Brussels profile is the only reason we even know his name." Elias absorbed the data, his mind racing. Al-Haddad's signature was coordinated, mass casualty attacks designed for maximum psychological impact. "This is his playbook. He's moved from planner to executioner." "Which is why we needed you on the ground 5 hours ago," Barnes fumed. "This incident with the airline, it's not just a civil rights issue anymore. It's an active compromise of national security." The Tahoe weaved through traffic towards D.C. as notifications exploded on Elias's phone. The video of him being removed from the plane in Chicago was the #1 trending topic in the world. Flying While Black and Justice for Agent Vance were rocketing across social media. "It's everywhere," Barnes noted grimly. "Pinnacle just issued a press release apologizing and announcing the captain's suspension." "Suspended pending review," Elias read aloud. "That's their corporate damage control." "Not this time," Barnes said. "The Bureau is pressing the DOT and FAA for a full-blown federal investigation. When a citizen's bigotry impedes a federal agent in the act of responding to a confirmed terrorist threat, it crosses a line." The vehicle arrived at an anonymous-looking federal building in Arlington and descended into a secure garage. As they got out, Barnes put a hand on Elias's shoulder. "For what it's worth, son, the composure you showed on that plane, Decker is damn lucky you're a better man than he is." "I've had to be, sir," Elias replied. Barnes's face darkened. "And that's the whole goddamn problem." They entered the elevator that led directly to the Joint Operations Center. The moment the doors slid open, Elias shed the last remnants of the wronged passenger and became the weapon the Bureau had forged him to be. The mission was all. The JOC was a symphony of controlled chaos. Analysts tracked digital footprints, communications specialists monitored chatter, and a SWAT team leader briefed his men. The head of the D.C. Metro Police Counterterrorism Unit, a formidable woman named Commander Diaz, strode over to greet them. "Agent Vance, Commander Diaz, heard you ran into some turbulence on the way here." "Let's get to work," Elias said, deflecting. Actually, Diaz said, her expression serious, that turbulence may be directly relevant to our work. She gestured to an intel board. We just discovered that one of al-Haddad's known associates worked as a baggage handler at O'Hare for Pinnacle Airlines. He quit 2 weeks ago. Elias froze. He turned to look at her. Which gates did he work? The C-Con course. Gate C-12. His gate. A sickening possibility began to form in Elias's mind. Barnes saw the look on his face. Let's stick to the facts for now, but we're chasing every lead. Elias turned back to the threat board, his mind on fire. It didn't matter now if Captain Decker was a bigot, a pawn, or something far worse. What mattered was that a terrorist cell may have just successfully used American racism as a weapon against the United States. He began breaking down the intel, his voice calm and authoritative. But inside, a new and terrible fire was burning. The man who had accused him of being a threat may have just handed a real one the time it needed to set the Capitol ablaze. And Elias was determined as hell to put it out. The operations center became a crucible of intense focus. Elias stood before a massive, interactive map of Washington, D.C., his mind a supercomputer processing terabytes of data. He moved with an almost preternatural calm, his finger tracing patterns of movement, connecting seemingly disparate pieces of intel. They've abandoned their primary targets, Elias announced to the assembled task force, his voice cutting through the hum of electronics. Grand Central, Port Authority. Those were misdirections. Look at the supply runs, the burner phone pings, the stolen vehicle reports. They all triangulate here. His finger landed on the Farragut Square metro station, a bustling hub for 3 major lines. It's an enclosed space, high-density traffic, multiple entrance and exit points. It's al-Haddad's signature. Commander Diaz studied the station's blueprints on a nearby screen. It's a tactical nightmare. Covering every entrance without spooking them will be impossible. We don't have to cover all of them, Barnes countered. We just need to know which one they'll use. They'll use the 17th Street entrance, Elias stated with conviction, zooming in on the map. Their staging area is a rental apartment in DuPont Circle. This route is the fastest, most direct path, with the most pedestrian cover. This is where we make our stand. The team moved to execute the new plan, a whirlwind of coordinated action. FBI agents and Metro PD officers began deploying to strategic, concealed positions around Farragut Square. Elias was paired with a seasoned Metro PD detective, a cynical, seen-it-all cop named Frank Rizzo. They were assigned to a surveillance van parked across from the 17th Street entrance. Heard you had a hell of a morning, Rizzo said gruffly as he calibrated a long-range microphone. Captain was a real piece of work, huh? Elias kept his focus on the bank of monitors, which displayed feeds from a dozen hidden cameras. He was an obstacle. We overcame it. Let's focus on the mission. Rizzo chuckled without humor. Fair enough. Just gotta say, balls of steel, kid. I'd have lost my cool. Hell, I almost lost it once when a rookie cop pulled a gun on me during an undercover buy, 'cause my description fit the profile. It's a crazy world. Elias glanced at him. It was a shared story, a shorthand for a reality Rizzo, a white man, could never fully know, but could at least acknowledge. He appreciated the sentiment. Jock to all units, Barnes's voice crackled in their earpieces. We have 3 hostiles on the move from the DuPont location. They are on foot. Your ETA to target is 9 minutes. A palpable tension filled the van. Elias and Rizzo checked their sidearms, ran a final comms check. This was the razor's edge, the quiet moments where years of training held back the torrent of adrenaline. You know the messed up part? Rizzo mused, his eyes fixed on the bustling sidewalk. If that jackass pilot had just kept his mouth shut and flown the plane, you'd have been here hours ago. We might have nabbed these clowns before they even got their hands on the explosives. It was a thought that had been gnawing at Elias. Decker's bigotry hadn't just insulted him, it had actively aided the enemy. Eagle 1 reporting. A sniper's voice came over the comms. Subjects are moving south on Connecticut Avenue. I have positive ID on Al-Haddad. All units hold, Barnes commanded. I want them inside the station lobby before we initiate. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. Elias watched the three men on screen as they moved through the afternoon crowds, looking for all the world like ordinary commuters. Jock, I have them, Elias said, his voice a low hum. Primary target Al-Haddad. 2 associates match our intel. They are entering the 17th Street escalator. Confirmed, came Barnes's reply. All teams, stand by for execute command. Take them alive. We need the intel. The 3 men stepped off the escalator into the station's main lobby. As one of them moved to purchase a fare card, Al-Haddad momentarily separated from the group. That was the moment Elias had been waiting for. It was the signal. Execute, Barnes ordered. In a perfectly synchronized move, tactical teams emerged from a maintenance corridor, a newsstand, and the flow of commuter traffic, sealing off all exits in seconds. Elias and Rizzo burst from the van, weapons drawn, closing the distance to Al-Haddad from behind. Zafir Al-Haddad! Elias called out, his voice a blade that cut through the station's noise. FBI, don't move! Al-Haddad froze, his hand darting inside his jacket. But Elias was faster. In 2 powerful strides, he was on him, slamming Al-Haddad's arm against a pillar, a sharp crack echoing through the lobby as the detonator he was reaching for clattered to the floor. It's over, Elias growled, forcing him to the ground as Rizzo provided cover. The other 2 suspects were already in custody. Hostile secured, Elias reported into his comms. Weapons and a trigger device recovered. Good work, all teams, Barnes responded, a wave of relief in his voice. EOD is sweeping their bags now. As they cuffed a snarling Al-Haddad, the terrorist looked up, his eyes finding Elias's. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. You're not supposed to be here, he whispered in accented English. Not yet. Elias stared down at him. What does that mean? Al-Haddad chuckled, a rattling sound from deep in his chest. Your flight, your pilot, he was supposed to give us more time. A bolt of ice shot through Elias's veins. He keyed his mic. Jock, we need to get these men to a black site for immediate interrogation. There's a direct connection between this plot and my flight delay. An hour later, in a sterile, soundproofed room in a secure FBI facility, the full, horrifying picture came into focus. Al-Haddad's network had an inside source at O'Hare, the baggage handler who was his cousin. The source didn't know the full details of the attack, only that an FBI counter-terror specialist was being flown in from Chicago. His instructions were to create any kind of delay possible. The cousin had learned of Captain Decker's reputation for profiling minority passengers through airline gossip. He had tipped off Decker through an anonymous security concern call, knowing that Elias's race would be the trigger and Decker's bigotry would be the mechanism. It was the perfect plan. Decker would think he was a hero protecting his flight, while in reality he was an unwitting pawn in a terrorist plot, his racism weaponized against the very country he claimed to be protecting. They used him, Barnes said, staring at the debriefing report. They identified a systemic weakness, American racism, and exploited it as a tactical advantage. By the time Vance landed, Commander Diaz added, her face grim, the bombs were supposed to have already gone off. We were lucky, Elias said, the words tasting like ash. If Captain Rostova hadn't pushed the engines to their limit, if we'd missed that 17th Street entrance. But we didn't, Barnes interrupted, his eyes boring into Elias. We didn't miss because you were on the ground, because you put the mission ahead of the insult. You saved the city today, Elias. The operation was a resounding success. The cell was neutralized, the bombs diffused, and the intel recovered was already leading to arrests in 3 other cities. But Elias couldn't shake the chilling knowledge of how close they had come to utter catastrophe, all because of one man's prejudice. As the debriefing concluded, Barnes pulled him aside. "The airline insider is in custody. We're investigating Decker for criminal negligence and reckless endangerment at a minimum. If we find any evidence he was a knowing participant—" "And if he was just a bigot?" Elias asked. "Then he's a bigot who deliberately delayed a federal agent during an active terrorist threat," Barnes said firmly. "Either way, he's going to face the consequences." Elias nodded, the exhaustion of the last 24 hours finally crashing down on him. The irony was suffocating. Captain Richard Decker, the man who saw Elias as a security threat, had been the single greatest threat to national security that day. His prejudice had been a more effective weapon for the terrorists than any bomb or gun. It was a perfect, terrifying metaphor for a much larger battle, and Elias knew that his fight was far from over. 3 days after the takedown in D.C., Elias Vance found himself in the ornate, intimidating hearing room of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. The story of his delayed flight had merged with the news of the foiled terrorist plot, creating a political firestorm. The hearing, initially intended to be a routine intelligence brief, had been elevated to a nationally televised event exploring the nexus of discrimination and national security. The room was a pressure cooker of flashing cameras, whispering aides, and stern-faced lawmakers. Elias, dressed in a conservative dark suit, sat at the witness table, reviewing his notes. Next to him were A.D. Barnes, the Inspector General of the Department of Transportation, and Thomas Wilson, the beleaguered CEO of Pinnacle Airlines. The committee chairman, a formidable congressman named Howard Barnes, banged his gavel. "This hearing will come to order. Today we confront a deeply troubling question. Can racial prejudice within our commercial aviation system create a vulnerability that endangers the lives of all Americans?" He introduced the witnesses and then turned his gaze to Elias. "We will begin with the testimony of Special Agent Elias Vance. Agent Vance, you may begin." Elias leaned into the microphone, his voice steady and clear. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 3 days ago, Captain Bradley Sullivan of Pinnacle Airlines ordered me removed from my flight while I was traveling under federal orders to prevent a terrorist attack on this very city. The captain cited amorphous security concerns, which have now been proven to be baseless and rooted in prejudice." He methodically recounted the events, not with personal anger, but with the cold, factual precision of an after-action report. "This was not, however, an isolated incident," he continued, his words commanding the room's absolute attention. "It was an extreme example of a systemic problem. Federal agents, military service members, and countless ordinary citizens of color are subjected to this kind of suspicion and scrutiny every single day. When that bias impedes the lawful execution of a federal agent's duties, it ceases to be a mere social issue. It becomes a hole in our national defense." He concluded his statement by stressing that this was not about one bad apple, but about a diseased orchard that required fundamental reform. A hush fell over the room. The questioning began, sharp and relentless. "Agent Vance," began a congresswoman from California, "in your professional judgment, did the delay caused by Captain Decker's actions bring the terror plot closer to success?" "Yes, Congresswoman," Elias replied. "It compressed our operational timeline from approximately 8 hours to less than 4. Based on the suspect's confessions, the bombs were set to detonate approximately 45 minutes after the time we ultimately apprehended them." A wave of murmurs swept the gallery. "So, to be clear," the congresswoman pressed, "an act of racial discrimination nearly resulted in a successful mass casualty terrorist attack in our nation's capital." "That is a correct assessment," Elias confirmed. The CEO, Thomas Wilson, visibly flinched. The questioning soon turned to him. Wilson, a man used to the insulated comfort of corporate boardrooms, was clearly out of his depth. "Mr. Wilson?" another congressman asked. "Your airline has released a statement on its commitment to diversity. Can you tell this committee how many formal complaints of racial discrimination have been filed against your flight crews in the last 3 years?" Wilson hesitated, shuffling his papers. "We have received a number of such complaints, Congressman." "Provide the number, Mr. Wilson." 142, Wilson mumbled. "And in how many of those 142 cases was disciplinary action, including termination, taken against the employee?" Wilson looked down at his desk. "In 13 cases." 13, the congressman roared. "So in over 90% of cases where a passenger felt discriminated against, your airline took no substantive action? Is that the commitment to diversity you're selling the American people?" The final and most damning witness was Jessica Palmer, a flight attendant who had served on Captain Decker's crew. She testified, with a voice trembling but resolute, to Decker's long history of discriminatory remarks and actions, which had been repeatedly reported to HR, with no result. "He called it proactive security," Palmer said, "but we all knew what it was. It was racial profiling, plain and simple. We reported him, but the company did nothing." As the hearing drew to a close, Chairman Barnes addressed Elias one last time. "Agent Vance, based on your expertise, what concrete steps should this committee and the aviation industry take?" Elias outlined a 3-point plan. First, a standardized universal protocol for verifying federal and law enforcement credentials that leaves no room for subjective interpretation. Second, mandatory, scenario-based implicit bias training for all airline and TSA personnel with annual recertification. And third, a new federal statute that makes the willful impediment of a federal agent in the execution of their duties due to discriminatory practices a felony offense. He paused, letting his final point sink in. "We must treat prejudice not just as a moral failing, but as the critical security threat that it is. Our enemies are watching. They know our weaknesses. Let's not hand them a weapon to use against us." The hearing concluded with Chairman Barnes vowing to draft legislation based on Elias's recommendations. As they left the chamber, reporters swarmed them. A journalist from a major news network shouted, "Agent Vance, Captain Decker is claiming this is all a misunderstanding, that you are using the race card for your own benefit. Do you have a response?" Elias paused, turned to the cameras, his face unreadable. "My response is this. The mission was to save lives. The race card Captain Decker is referring to was a man's skin color that he perceived as a threat. That perception delayed me. That delay almost cost American lives. This isn't about my career, it's about our country's security. The facts speak for themselves." The clip would lead every evening news broadcast. Later that night, A.D. Barnes called Elias in his hotel room. "Get some sleep, son," Barnes said. "The director just called. The president saw your testimony. He wants to meet with you in the Oval Office tomorrow morning to discuss your proposed reforms." Elias hung up the phone. The morning had started with a bitter personal humiliation and ended with a presidential invitation. He had been thrust into a role he never wanted, but he understood the weight of the moment. He had the chance to turn his personal battle into a national policy, to forge his pain into a shield that might protect others. It was a heavy burden, but for the first time since that 2:14 a.m. phone call, he felt a flicker of hope that something good might rise from the ashes of that ugly morning in Chicago. 6 months after his testimony, Elias Vance stood before the graduating class of new FBI agents at Quantico. The auditorium was filled with the best and brightest, a diverse tapestry of faces representing the future of federal law enforcement. When I stood where you are 15 years ago, Elias began, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. I believed the badge was a colorblind shield, that once you earned it, you were defined only by your commitment to duty, honor, and fidelity. I learned that this is both a noble aspiration and a naive illusion. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the young agents. The badge does not erase who you are, it magnifies it. Your background, your experiences, your perspectives, these are not liabilities to be suppressed. They are your greatest assets in protecting a nation as diverse as ours. The Vance Protocols, as the media had dubbed them, were now law. The legislation he had recommended had passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, fundamentally reforming airline security procedures and accountability. Captain Richard Decker, his career in ruins, had pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment to avoid federal charges, and was now reportedly teaching at a small flight school in rural Idaho. The CEO of Pinnacle Airlines had been forced to resign, and the company was now a case study in corporate crisis management, undergoing a massive court-monitored overhaul of its training and HR practices. But the most significant change was Elias's own career trajectory. He now led the FBI's newly created Civil Rights and Critical Infrastructure Task Force, a unit designed specifically to identify and mitigate security threats that arise from systemic bias and discrimination. He had turned a moment of personal degradation into a national mandate. You will face threats from foreign powers and domestic terrorists, he told the graduates, but you will also face threats that come from within, from suspicion, from prejudice, from fear. Your job is to fight them all with equal vigor, because a nation that allows its own biases to fester creates vulnerabilities that no border wall or surveillance system can protect against. After his speech, he flew back to Chicago. It was a trip he had been putting off, but now felt necessary. The flight itself was a testament to the change. At the gate, Captain Ava Rostova greeted him personally. "Director Vance," she said with a warm smile, "it's an honor to have you on board. Things are different now. Better." The check-in and security process was seamless, professional, and respectful. The new credentialing system worked exactly as designed. His first meeting in Chicago was not at the FBI field office, but at a quiet coffee shop. Across the table sat Mark Scanlon, the businessman from the flight. Scanlon had written him 3 letters of apology and had called his office a dozen times. Elias had finally agreed to meet. Scanlon looked like a different man. The corporate arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. "Director Vance, I know you don't owe me a thing, but I needed to tell you in person how profoundly my encounter with you has changed me," he said. "I went back to my company and forced a top-down review of our diversity and inclusion policies. I realized my gut feeling wasn't instinct. It was ignorance. I've sold my shares in 2 companies and endowed a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation." Elias listened, nodding slowly. This was the ripple effect he hadn't anticipated. "The hardest bias to fight is the one we refuse to see in ourselves, Mr. Scanlon. Acknowledging it is where the real work begins." "I just hope you can accept my apology," Scanlon said. "This was never about apologies," Elias replied. "It was about creating a better, safer system. It sounds like you're contributing to that. That's what matters." On his flight back to Washington that evening, as the plane began its descent, the lead flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a special guest on our flight tonight, FBI Director Elias Vance. His courageous actions 6 months ago have made air travel safer and more just for every single one of us." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. It was surreal. Elias, a man who had built a career in the shadows, was now a public symbol. He gave a slight, awkward nod of acknowledgement. The journey that began with him being branded a threat had come full circle. He was now seen as a protector, not in spite of his identity, but because of it. Elias Vance's harrowing journey reveals a profound truth. Prejudice is not merely a social injustice, it is a critical threat to our collective security. When we allow bias to dictate our actions, we create blind spots that can be, and will be, exploited by those who wish us harm. True security is not achieved through suspicion, but through clarity, professionalism, and the core belief that our diversity is our strength, not a weakness to be feared. This story teaches us that accountability is the cornerstone of progress. The consequences faced by Captain Decker and his airline were not about revenge. They were about reinforcing a standard. An individual's prejudice nearly led to a national tragedy, proving that bias has a cost that can be measured in lives. We learn that real change, while often born from moments of intense pain and injustice, is possible when courage confronts complacency. The Vance protocols were forged in the fire of one man's humiliation, but now serve as a shield for all. Most importantly, Elias's story demonstrates that dignity is not a gift to be given, but a right to be defended. His unwavering professionalism under extreme pressure is a masterclass in strength. But it was his willingness to channel his private pain into public reform that turned a personal trauma into a triumph for civil rights and national security. Have you ever seen an act of prejudice backfire so spectacularly? What can we, as a society, do to transform our own biases from blind spots into bridges of understanding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible true stories of change, and share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded that one person's courage can indeed change the world. Thank you for watching. Remember that sometimes the ugliest moments can lead to the most beautiful and necessary transformations.